This is God and Autobiography, the podcast, a dramatic adaptation and continuing discussion of the book God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin. He was a lifelong agnostic, but one day he had an occasion to pray. To his vast surprise, God answered in words. Being a philosopher, he had a lot of questions, and God had a lot to tell him. Episode 194. Welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm Scott Langdon, and this is episode 194. After God explains to Jerry that the diversity of revelations isn't the problem so many have made it out to be, God takes Jerry back to the early days of the Chinese people and the Chinese mind. Jerry begins to understand that God communicates not only with individuals, but also with and through cultures. In our next Life Wisdom Project episode, Jerry welcomes back a dear friend of the podcast, Jonathan Wiedenbaum, to discuss the myriad ways God comes to us as humans. So this week, we bring you episode 20, God Shares His Earliest Interactions in Chinese Spirituality. I hope you enjoy the episode. Episode 20. To find the beginning, I looked for the Chinese Moses or Socrates. But books on China don't start with individual thinkers or religious leaders. They start with the Chinese mind, or the Chinese spirit. Lord, I'm not finding a founder of Chinese religions.
Your approach is too individual, too Protestant. I communicate not only with individuals, but with peoples, and my instruments of communication include not just words and voices, but institutions, traditions, mores, historical currents and trends, and the like. I speak to people through their cultures as a voice is through air. I am part of the warp and woof of people's mental lives. Culture is inspired.
And to the Chinese in particular?
I communicated a holistic reverential attitude to nature as a whole, which is the foundation for the idea of harmony with nature as a guide to conduct and salvation.
Nature is capitalized to indicate that what is meant is not nature in the sense of a picnic in the woods, or nature as defined by contrasts, such as nature versus nurture, nature versus convention, or nature versus human artifacts. Rather, it is the overarching nature that encompasses them all. For the Chinese, heaven, Tian, is a level, the highest level of cosmic nature. The ancient Book of Odes advises, quote, always strive to be in harmony with heaven's mandate, end quote. Lord, am I on the right track?
Yes, but what you haven't picked up on is the Chinese aestheticizing of nature, which is both broad and fine-tuned. Look at that poetry. The references to flowers and the like are not the kind of awe and fear that inspired early Greek polytheism, nor a vague holistic wonder at the universe as a whole. It reflects a sense of the expressive side of nature, which is, of course, my expressiveness through nature. They were subtle and picked up on that.
Looking at classic odes, I found that some of them are hymns used in religious and state ceremonies. Others that arose among the common folk are simple songs, accompanied by a zither, that tell in a direct and honest way about life, love, and loss. The action is often set in nature, sometimes in the sense of nature as an authoritative context. Lord, what was special about Chinese culture?
The Chinese are an unusual people. They resonate to nature, feel its tones and rhythms, are attuned to it, and it tells them certain things. They catch its vibrations and try to match their vibrations to it. This, in turn, brings inner peace and harmony. And it is a right response to the cosmos. There is a natural rhythm and ordering that is healing for the soul to conform to. It is not like decay, some sort of divine law or righteousness or duty.
The Greek idea of decay meant not transgressing the proper limits, hence justice or right order. This is not the Chinese understanding of that order.
It is more like joining an instrumental group and fitting in with the harmonies, the patterns. For the Chinese, it is very intuitive, a sensibility, not like the Stoic logos.
The Stoic logos was a divine rationality that informs the universe and to which the rational soul conforms. For the Chinese, what is needed is not rationality, but a fine-tuned sensibility.
One of the things I put into the universe, one of the things I am, is the natural order and the prime tone or metronome or tuning fork. There is a divine hum to the universe, and that is one way I communicate. So I set aside this whole people and communicate with them very profoundly in this way.
And the Chinese were adept at picking up the signal.
They have both a natural temperament and cultural, linguistic, and symbolic resources that lean them this way, much more than in the West. People cannot take everything in at once. They have to specialize, and the Chinese have specialized in this.
With little or no sense of a personal God, didn't they lose a lot?
Everybody loses a lot. No one gets it all in. That's fine. They all help me realize, express myself. They are all part of the big story.
At this point, I was told to just sit with God for a moment. I was led into my inner self. Looking at nature from that vantage point, I saw it aesthetically. Samuel Taylor Coleridge said that fiction requires, quote, the willing suspension of disbelief, end quote. The aesthetic attitude requires the willing suspension of desire. That allows the order and beauty of nature to reveal itself uncoerced. That is the difference between art and decoration, and more radically between the appreciation of nature and seeing it as something to be dismantled for other uses. It is the difference between inflicting ourselves on nature and letting the divine reality show through. The Chinese had let the divine reality show through. The great teacher of China was Confucius. The story has it that as a young man, he went through a period of intense meditation on what he should do with his life. He began having recurring dreams about the Duke of Chao, one of the legendary patriarchs of China, the embodiment of wisdom and virtue. Confucius believed these dreams were sending him a message. He was to revive the ancient ways and the classics from which they could be learned. This was to be his most enduring legacy. It is a great story, but as I read it, I kept hearing,
No, not from dreams.
Lord, where did Confucius get his inspiration?
He got it from his sense of fittingness. For him, duty was a kind of fittingness. It was fitting that a son pay appropriate honors to his father.
This is something the young Confucius raised by his widowed mother, had managed to do in spite of great difficulties in even locating where his father had been buried.
It was fitting in an almost literal sense, like putting the square peg in the square hole, or putting each puzzle piece exactly where it goes without forcing it. It is the fittingness of an artisan, a craftsman, who knows, who virtually sees where each piece should go, where the edges need to be smoothed, where the joints need to be fitted together. He saw society in that way and was a craftsman of society. If fathers behave fittingly toward their sons and vice versa, and husbands to their wives and kings to their subjects and so forth, then all the pieces would fit without being forced. You can understand his sayings in this light. You call the Chinese approach aesthetic, and that is not wrong, but aesthetic means many things. And for Confucius, it means the aesthetics of the master craftsman writ large.
Confucius describes the superior person, quote, "In seeing, he is careful to see clearly. In hearing, he is careful to hear distinctly. In his looks, he is careful to be kindly. In his manner, to be respectful. In his words, to be loyal. In his work, to be diligent." End quote. Proper behavior cannot be achieved by conforming to a general rule. One must pay careful attention to the situation and adjust behavior in the most fitting way. For, in the Confucian version of the Golden Mean, quote, "To go too far is as bad as not to go far enough." End quote. Words should fit deeds with neither excessive pride nor false modesty. What to say, or whether to speak at all, depends on what words or silences are fitting to the person and the situation. Quote, "Not to talk about the way to one who could be talked to is to waste a man. To talk to those who cannot be talked to is to waste one's words." End quote. Confucius presented one version of the way. There was another, presented by his older contemporary, Lao Tzu. The great work in the Taoist tradition is the Tao Te Ching, the book of the way and the power. At first, I thought this would be the place to begin my Chinese studies, but was warned.
Don't assume that every text enshrined in the history of religion is an authentic or pure communication from me. The Taoism of Lao Tzu reflects a great deal of his own personality, shy, reticent, unassuming. I communicated a grain of truth to him. The rest is his own invention or elaboration. Find that grain of truth.
This is what I learned. Confucius had taught the rules of behavior appropriate to various social roles. Lao Tzu was less interested in the ways of the world and more interested in the way, the Tao that lies beyond language and reason. The two men are said to have been contemporaries, living around the 5th or 6th century BCE, about the same time as Socrates. Writing a few centuries later, the great historian Sima Qian, the Tacitus of ancient China, reports that the two sages met in the capital of Luoyang, where Lao Tzu, the older of the two, was curator of the royal library. Lao Tzu told Confucius, "The men about whom you talk, the wise rulers venerated in the classics, are dead, and their bones are mouldered to dust. Only their words are left. Moreover, when the superior man gets his opportunity, he mounts aloft, but when the time is against him, he is carried along by the force of circumstances. The outcome depends not on his will or talent or moral cultivation, but on whether he is attuned to the flow of the situation."
I have heard that a good merchant, though he have rich treasures safely stored, appears as if he were poor, and that the superior man, though his virtue be complete, is yet to outward seeming stupid. Those in touch with the way have no need or desire to flaunt their wealth or virtue. Put away your proud air and many desires, your insinuating habit and wild will. They are no advantage to you. This is all I have to tell you. After the meeting, Confucius is supposed to have said, I know how birds can fly, fishes swim, and animals run. But the runner may be snared, the swimmer hooked, and the flyer shot by the arrow. But there is the dragon. I cannot tell how he mounts on the wind through the clouds and rises to heaven. Today I have seen Lao Tzu, and can only compare him to the dragon. The historian adds his own epigraph. Quote, Lao Tzu cultivated the Tao and its attributes, the chief aim of his studies being how to keep himself concealed and remain unknown. He continued to reside at the capital of Chao, but after a long time, seeing the decay of the dynasty, he left it and went away to the barrier gate, leading out of the kingdom on the northwest. Jin His, the warden of the gate, said to him, You are about to withdraw yourself out of sight. Let me insist on your first composing for me a book. On this, Lao Tzu wrote a book in 2 parts, setting forth his views on the Tao and its attributes, in more than 5,000 characters. He then went away, and it is not known where he died. He was a superior man who liked to keep himself unknown. The book he wrote is the Tao Te Ching. Ching means not just a book, but the book, an authoritative classic or canon. The character Tao is composed of the characters for moving on and head, hence going ahead. The original meaning was way, with the connotations of both path and method. In this respect, it is similar to the Greek hodos, originally meaning path, from which we derive the term method, metahodos, according to the path. As method, the Tao suggests such ideas as principle, rationality, or reason, hence the right way or truth. And finally, rational speech or word. In this respect, it resembles the Greek logos, which means both word, as in the opening of the Gospel of John, quote, in the beginning was the Word, end quote, and reason, which we retain in such words as logic and sociological reasoning about society. But etymological analysis is not dispositive when one comes to interpreting the Tao Te Ching. Take the famous opening line, usually translated as, quote, the way that can be spoken of is not the eternal way, end quote. I am told that, in Chinese, the line has only 3 characters, the last with a negative indicator, each of which means Tao. Literally, it looks like Tao, Tao, not Tao, which suggests that the Tao, that is Taoed, is not the Tao. Another translation captures the repetition, quote, the reason that can be reasoned is not the eternal reason, end quote. The can be is interpretive since there are no modals in Chinese and no tenses. Alan Watts suggests that the element that expresses going and forms part of the character for Tao also has the connotation of rhythm. Hence, the Tao could be understood as intelligent rhythm, the rational pulse of the universe. I remembered that God had described himself as the divine metronome. Whatever the best translation, the Tao is elusive and clothed in paradox. What can we say about it? First, the way does not seem to be a creator standing over or outside the world. For example, From the English translation by Alan Watts, quote, "All things depend upon it to exist, and it does not abandon them. To its accomplishments it lays no claim. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them." End quote. But there is a kind of creation story which has some resemblance to what I have received about God before creation. Quote, "There is something obscure which is complete before heaven and earth arose, tranquil, quiet, standing alone without change, moving around without peril. It could be the mother of everything. I don't know its name, and call it Tao." End quote. The Tao provides everything without having to do anything. Quote, "The Tao does nothing, but nothing is left undone." End quote. What about the other key term, De? In Confucius, De, it, is virtue, character, or moral force, and requires moral cultivation. For the Taoists, it is virtue in a gentler sense. Lao Tzu's great successor, Chuang Tzu, writes, quote, "When water is still, it is like a mirror, reflecting the beard and the eyebrows. It gives the accuracy of the water level, and the philosopher makes it his model. And if water thus derives lucidity from stillness, how much more the faculties of the mind? The mind of the sage, in repose, becomes the mirror of the universe." End quote.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with Episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with Episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.